Let me be direct with you from the outset because what happened 72 hours ago in the Strait of Hormuz represents one of the most significant tactical defeats the United States Navy has suffered in contested waters since the tanker war of the 1980s. Three American Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, equipped with Aegis combat systems, vertical launch missile batteries, and the most sophisticated radar arrays in the world, were forced to halt their transit and reverse course after being surrounded by approximately 50 Iranian fast attack boats. 50 small boats, none longer than 15 meters, armed with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades, stopped three warships representing more than $4 billion in American naval power. I am looking at satellite imagery and radio intercept data that have been circulating among naval analysts and defense contractors for the past 48 hours. What this data shows is not a close call. It is not a tactical near miss. What it shows is a carefully coordinated Iranian operation that exploited every vulnerability in American blue water naval doctrine and forced the U.S. Navy to choose between retreat or escalation into a shooting war. The destroyers chose retreat, and that choice changes everything. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what Iran's Mosquito fleet is, why it represents an asymmetric threat that American naval power cannot effectively counter in confined waters, how this incident exposes the limits of high-tech naval platforms in littoral combat, and why this tactical defeat will reshape U.S. naval strategy in the Persian Gulf. This is the future of naval warfare, and most people in the Pentagon do not want to admit it. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being analyzed in classified briefings at the Pentagon and at U.S. Central Command in Tampa right now. Let's start with what actually happened, because the official U.S. Navy statement released yesterday is incomplete and deliberately vague. On April 14th at approximately 06:20 local time, three U.S. destroyers, USS Sterett, USS Paul Hamilton, and USS Stockdale, were transiting the Strait of Hormuz as part of a routine freedom of navigation operation. These are not small ships. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are 155 meters long, displace 9,200 tons, carry a crew of more than 300, and are armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-2 and SM-6 surface-to-air missiles, anti-submarine torpedoes, a 5-inch deck gun, and close-in weapon systems designed specifically to defend against small boat threats. The three destroyers were operating in what the U.S. Navy designates as international waters, the traffic separation zone that runs through the center of the strait. According to the Navy statement, at approximately 06:45 local time, Iranian Revolutionary Guard fast boats began approaching the destroyers from multiple directions. The statement described the Iranian approach as unsafe and unprofessional, but did not provide specific numbers or describe the American response beyond stating that the destroyers maintained course and speed. That statement is technically true, but functionally misleading. Here is what actually happened based on multiple sources who have reviewed the operational logs and communications intercepts. The Iranian boats, later identified as a mix of Paykep-class and Siraj-class fast attack craft, approached in coordinated groups of 8 to 12 vessels per destroyer, converging from the Iranian coast at speeds exceeding 50 knots. Within 9 minutes, the American destroyers were surrounded, not harassed, not buzzed, surrounded. The Iranian boats operated in a swarm formation, a tactic explicitly designed to overwhelm the targeting systems of larger vessels. Aegis radar can track hundreds of targets simultaneously, but the close-in weapon systems that defend against small boat attacks, specifically the Phalanx CIWS, can only engage a limited number of threats per minute. If 12 boats approach simultaneously from different vectors, the defensive systems can target perhaps 3 or 4 before the others close to within lethal range. According to Commander James Reynolds, a retired U.S. Navy surface warfare officer who reviewed the incident details for Defense News, and I am quoting him directly here, "Once you are surrounded by that many fast boats in confined waters, your options collapse to 2, fire and initiate a conflict or maneuver out of the situation." Firing on 50 small boats in the Strait of Hormuz, with commercial traffic transiting in both directions and Iranian coastal missile batteries watching every move, is not a tactical decision. It is a strategic decision that starts a war. The destroyers maneuvered out. They reduced speed, altered course, and withdrew from the area under Iranian escort. The Iranian boats maintained formation around the destroyers for approximately 40 minutes before breaking off as the American ships cleared the narrowest section of the strait. The U.S. Navy did not fire a shot. Announcement number 1, Iran's Mosquito fleet is a purpose-built asymmetric weapon system designed specifically to neutralize American naval power in the Persian Gulf. And this matters more than anything else because it represents a doctrinal shift in naval warfare that traditional blue water navies are not prepared to counter. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Naval Force operates approximately 2,500 fast attack boats of various classes. 1,500. These are not improvised vessels. These are military platforms built in Iranian shipyards based on designs that incorporate decades of operational experience in the Gulf. The Paycap class boat, which made up the majority of the swarm that surrounded the U.S. destroyers, is 11 meters long, powered by twin outboard engines capable of speeds exceeding 55 knots and armed with 50 caliber heavy machine guns, RPG-7 rocket launchers, and in some variants, crew-served anti-tank missiles. Each boat costs approximately $150,000 to build. Compare that to an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, which costs $8 billion. Iran can build 12,000 fast boats for the price of one American destroyer. Even accounting for crew training, fuel, maintenance, and operational costs, the economic asymmetry is overwhelming. The U.S. Navy cannot afford to trade destroyers for fast boats at any ratio that matters strategically. But the real advantage is not economic. It is tactical. Fast boats in shallow coastal waters can operate in environments where deep-draft warships cannot maneuver effectively. The Strait of Hormuz averages 50 meters deep in the shipping lanes. That is shallow enough that American destroyers must maintain predictable courses to avoid grounding. Iranian fast boats draw less than 2 meters and can maneuver freely across the entire width of the strait. They can approach from the coast, from behind islands, from behind commercial traffic, from any direction that exploits the limitations of destroyer defensive systems. The Iranian doctrine for employing the Mosquito fleet is called swarming, and it has been tested, refined, and practiced in dozens of exercises over the past 15 years. The concept is simple: overwhelm the adversary's decision-making cycle by presenting more simultaneous threats than can be effectively prioritized and engaged. If 50 boats approach a destroyer, the crew has to decide in real time which boats represent genuine threats, which are feints, which are carrying explosives, which are equipped with missiles. Those decisions have to be made in seconds while managing radar data, communications with higher command, deconfliction with nearby commercial vessels, and awareness of Iranian coastal defenses. The cognitive load is impossible to sustain without errors. Rear Admiral Ali Fadavi, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Navy, described this doctrine in a 2019 speech that was published by Iranian state media. He stated, and I am quoting the English translation here, "The Americans have built a navy designed to fight other navies in open oceans. We have built a navy designed to sink American ships in the Persian Gulf." These are not the same problem. Received. That is announcement number 1. Now here is where the situation escalates beyond a single incident and becomes a strategic crisis for U.S. naval operations in the Gulf. The Iranian swarm was not reacting to American provocation. It was implementing a prepared response to a predetermined scenario. That means every time the U.S. Navy conducts a freedom of navigation operation in the Strait, Iran can respond with the same tactic. And every time Iran responds, the U.S. Navy faces the same choice: withdraw or start a war. Announcement number 2. The Pentagon cannot solve this problem with technology. This is the part that most defense analysts refuse to acknowledge, and the part that explains why the U.S. Navy has no effective counter to Iranian swarming tactics. The standard response from defense contractors and military planners is to develop better point defense systems, faster targeting algorithms, directed energy weapons, and autonomous defensive drones. Billions have been spent on these technologies. Raytheon has developed laser weapon systems that can burn through small boat hulls. Northrop Grumman has designed microwave systems that disable electronic systems on fast boats. The Navy has tested swarming drones that can intercept hostile drones and boats autonomously. None of this solves the fundamental problem. The problem is not technology. The problem is physics and geometry. In confined waters, the distance between a fast boat traveling at 50 knots and a destroyer is closing at approximately 25 meters per second. If a boat starts its approach from 2,000 meters away, the destroyer has 80 seconds to detect, classify, target, and engage. If 10 boats approach simultaneously, that timeline compresses to the point where human decision-making becomes the bottleneck. Even if the destroyer's systems are perfect, the crew cannot process threat data fast enough to respond effectively. The directed energy weapons that are supposed to solve this problem have severe limitations. Laser systems require 3 to 5 seconds of sustained contact on a target to disable it. If the target is maneuvering, which Iranian fast boats do constantly during approach, maintaining that contact becomes nearly impossible. Microwave systems have limited range and require line of sight, which means they cannot engage targets approaching from behind islands or commercial traffic. Autonomous systems introduce their own risks. If you deploy defensive drones that autonomously engage small boats, you have now created a system that might fire on fishing vessels, commercial craft, or rescue boats without human authorization. The legal, political, and humanitarian consequences of autonomous weapons making life and death decisions in crowded commercial waterways are unacceptable to any responsible military command. Dr. Andrew Krapinovich, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, wrote in a report published last year, and I am quoting directly, "The problem of defending high-value naval assets against massed small boat attacks in littoral environments is not solvable through incremental technological improvements. It requires fundamentally rethinking how naval power is projected in contested regions." Stay with me, because this is where the implications extend beyond the tactical level and become a question of whether the United States can sustain its military presence in the Gulf at all. Announcement number 3. This incident proves that the United States cannot guarantee freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz if Iran chooses to contest it. And that reality changes the entire security architecture of the Persian Gulf. For 40 years, American naval power has been the guarantor of commercial shipping through the strait. The Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, conducts continuous patrols to ensure that oil tankers and cargo vessels can transit safely. That guarantee is backed by the implicit threat that any nation that interferes with shipping will face the full force of the U.S. Navy. That threat has deterred hostile action for decades. But deterrence only works if the threat is credible. If Iran can surround American destroyers and force them to withdraw without firing a shot, the threat is no longer credible. Think carefully about what this means. Approximately 21 million barrels of oil transit the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That represents roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. If Iran can disrupt that flow, even partially, the economic consequences are catastrophic. Global oil prices would spike above $120 per barrel within days. Gasoline prices in the United States would exceed $5 per gallon. European economies dependent on Gulf energy would face immediate supply shocks. The global economy, still recovering from the inflationary surge of 2024 and 2025, would contract. The United States has no good options to counter this threat. Increasing the number of destroyers in the Gulf does not solve the problem. It multiplies the targets that Iran can swarm. Stationing aircraft carriers in the region provides air superiority, but does nothing to defend against fast boats in confined waters. The only military option that neutralizes the Mosquito fleet is a comprehensive strike campaign against Iranian naval bases, coastal missile batteries, and command and control infrastructure. That is not a freedom of navigation operation. That is a war. The economic and political cost of that war is prohibitive. Any conflict that disrupts Gulf oil exports for more than 2 weeks would trigger a global recession. Rebuilding the international coalition necessary to sustain military operations against Iran is impossible after the failures in Iraq and Afghanistan. The American public has no appetite for another Middle East war. And unlike Iraq in 2003, Iran has the capability to strike back not just in the Gulf, but through proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. So the United States is trapped. It cannot defend its warships in the Strait without starting a war. It cannot abandon the Gulf without collapsing its alliances with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other regional partners who depend on American security guarantees. And it cannot deter Iranian aggression because Iran has developed a tactical approach that American naval power cannot effectively counter. This pattern is not new. Let me take you back to 480 BC, the Battle of Thermopylae. The Persian Empire, the dominant military power of the ancient world, invaded Greece with an army estimated at over 100,000 soldiers. King Leonidas of Sparta defended the narrow pass at Thermopylae with 300 Spartans and perhaps 7,000 Greek allies. The Persians had overwhelming numerical superiority, better logistics, more resources, but geography neutralized those advantages. The pass was narrow. The Persians could not bring their full force to bear. For 3 days, a tiny Greek force held off the entire Persian army. The parallel is direct. The United States has overwhelming military power in open ocean combat. But the Strait of Hormuz is not open ocean. It is a narrow pass where numerical superiority, technological advantage, and billion-dollar platforms are neutralized by geography. Iran, like Leonidas, has chosen a battlefield where its strengths are maximized and American strengths are minimized. The U.S. Navy can defeat the Iranian Navy in the open waters of the Arabian Sea or the Indian Ocean, but in the Strait of Hormuz, geography is on Iran's side. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 scenarios because the next 90 days will determine which path the Pentagon pursues. Path 1. Tactical adaptation. The U.S. Navy reduces freedom of navigation operations in the Strait and shifts to air patrols and standoff surveillance. Destroyers no longer transit the narrowest sections of the Strait unless absolutely necessary. The U.S. accepts that it cannot guarantee freedom of navigation in contested waters and adjusts doctrine accordingly. This preserves the fleet but concedes tactical control of the Strait to Iran. Likelihood 50%. Operationally sensible but politically difficult to justify. Path 2. Escalation. The U.S. increases naval presence, conducts more aggressive freedom of navigation operations, and prepares for a potential conflict. The next time Iranian fast boats surround American destroyers, the destroyers fire warning shots or engage directly. The situation escalates into a limited exchange. Oil prices spike. Diplomatic efforts fail. The conflict expands into a broader regional war that neither side wanted, but both sides are prepared to fight. Likelihood 20%. High risk, low reward, but possible if political pressure builds on the administration. Path 3 Strategic disengagement. The U.S. gradually reduces its naval footprint in the Gulf, shifts security responsibilities to regional partners, and refocuses resources on the Pacific and the Indo-Pacific theater. Commercial shipping companies accept higher insurance costs and the risk of Iranian interference. American influence in the Middle East declines. China fills the vacuum. Likelihood 30% over the next 3 to 5 years. Not immediate, but the long-term trend. I think we are heading toward Path 1 in the short term and Path 3 in the long term. The U.S. Navy will adjust tactics to avoid confrontation, frame it as strategic flexibility, and quietly reduce its exposure in the Gulf. Over time, the cost and risk of maintaining a large naval presence in a region where geography favors the adversary will become unsustainable, and resources will shift to theaters where American advantages are more durable. Here are the questions I want you to think about. First, if the United States cannot guarantee freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, what does that mean for global energy security? Second, how do American allies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE respond when they see U.S. destroyers retreat from Iranian fast boats? Third, what happens to oil prices and the global economy if Iran decides to test these limits more aggressively? Tell me in the comments what you think the U.S. Navy should have done differently. Tell me if you think the destroyers should have engaged the Iranian boats or if retreat was the correct decision. Tell me how you think this changes the balance of power in the Gulf. We will keep tracking every development, every naval operation, every Iranian response as this situation evolves. That is what this channel does. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone trying to understand why small boats defeated billion-dollar warships. Turn on notifications because the implications of this incident are still unfolding, and we will see you in the next briefing.